Imagine a world where a woman's swelling belly wasn't a symbol of life and joy, but a damning confession etched in flesh. A visible scar of sin that invited the wrath of God, church, and community. In the grim tapestry of medieval Europe, unwed pregnancy wasn't met with whispers of support or quiet understanding. It unleashed a torrent of brutality where bodies were broken, spirits crushed, and futures erased. What happened to these women is darker than you think. A chilling blend of superstition, shame, and merciless control that turned vulnerability into a battlefield. Dive into this forgotten horror, and you'll see how the past's shadows still linger in our debates on justice and autonomy. In the heart of medieval justice lay the ordeal, a barbaric ritual where God's supposed intervention decided guilt or innocence. For unwed pregnant women accused of fornication or adultery, this meant facing the scalding embrace of boiling water or the searing grip of red-hot iron. Legal codes from the 9th century Carolingian Empire and later canon law detailed these horrors. A woman plunged her hand into a cauldron to fetch a ring or stone, her arm bandaged for 3 days. If it healed cleanly, divine mercy. If it festered, guilt and punishment. For these women, already weakened by pregnancy and often malnutrition, the trauma was devastating. Miscarriages were common, infections fatal, yet authorities shrugged it off as heaven's will. In a society prizing honor over humanity, these ordeals highlighted the dark truth. A pregnant body was no shield, but a target for superstition's cruel blade. Public branding seared not just skin, but souls, turning unwed pregnancy into a permanent emblem of disgrace. In village squares across medieval Europe, crowds gathered to witness the executioner's red-hot iron press against a trembling woman's forehead or cheek, forever marking her as an adulteress. Laws in Normandy and Brittany, influenced by ancient Roman traditions, sanctioned this for moral transgressions, especially when a visible belly betrayed the sin. In the Holy Roman Empire, it persisted into the 15th century, while England favored subtler shames like barefoot marches in white sheets, rope around the neck, confessing aloud. Theologian Thomas Aquinas rationalized it in his Summa Theologica, deeming sins of the flesh as degrading to the soul's reason. What happened here was darker than you think. Branding wasn't mere punishment. It was a societal message, etched in agony, that women's bodies belonged to the community's moral order. Flagellation, the rhythmic crack of the whip, echoed through medieval courts as a corrective for unwed pregnancies deemed undeniable proof of fornication. Rooted in 11th century monastic reforms by figures like Peter Damian, who saw bodily suffering as a path to salvation, mirroring Christ's scourging. This practice spread to secular and ecclesiastical justice by the 12th century. In England, York and London court records describe pregnant women sentenced to public whippings or processions, barefoot and clad in symbolic garments, confessing before congregations on holy days. Continental Europe was harsher, with lashes administered in town squares. These women bore a double curse, physical pain amplified by their condition and spiritual condemnation for corrupting the unborn. Darker than you think, this wasn't mercy but a system where the lash stripped dignity, reinforcing that a swollen womb invited not compassion, but coerced atonement through blood and tears. Behind convent walls, not all souls sought refuge willingly. For unwed pregnant women, especially nuns or those from noble families, monastic cells became prisons of isolation. Post-Gregorian reforms in the late 11th century tightened church control, viewing such pregnancies as scandals demanding containment. In Flanders, northern France, and the Holy Roman Empire, authorities locked these women away until childbirth, under austere conditions. Meager rations, endless prayers, and enforced silence in Benedictine or Cistercian houses. The child might then be whisked to a foundling home, anonymity preserved. Church officials spun this as protective mercy, shielding from temptation and shame. But what happened was darker than you think. It was calculated erasure, controlling bodies to uphold social facades, turning sacred spaces into cages where vulnerability festered in solitude. No trial needed, just a decree from elders or priests. Leave and never return. Banishment cast unwed pregnant women into the wilderness, stripping them of community, protection, and identity. In rural medieval England, like Norfolk and Suffolk, manor court rolls note such expulsions, tied to threats of excommunication or worse. Across Europe, especially in tight-knit villages, a visible pregnancy disrupted the Christian moral fabric, making the woman untouchable. Exile served as erasure, pushing her beyond sight and memory. Darker than you think, this wasn't mere relocation. It was social death, forcing women into beggary, peril, or anonymous fates, where the community's purity came at the cost of human lives discarded like shadows. Beyond physical torments, the darker legacy lay in the invisible wounds, shattered psyches and fractured societies. These women, branded sinners by theologians like St. Jerome, who warned that virginity could be lost by a mere thought, faced lifelong stigma. Families disowned them to salvage honor, communities shunned them as moral pollutants. Ecclesiastical courts, blending law and faith, amplified this, turning personal crises into public spectacles. What happened extended far. Miscarriages from ordeals, infections from whippings, despair in cells, all echoed a system where compassion was heresy. This psychological brutality highlighted the era's core darkness, where fear of divine disorder justified crushing the vulnerable under the weight of collective judgment. These horrors, ordeals, brandings, lashes, imprisonments, banishments, wove a web of suffering that reinforced patriarchal power, silencing women and enforcing rigid morality. Yet they reveal more: how religion and law converged to punish bodies, often without nuance for consent or circumstance. What happened to unwed pregnant women in the Middle Ages is darker than you think, a stark reminder of vulnerability's cost in unforgiving times. Today, as debates on reproductive rights rage, these echoes urge us toward empathy, autonomy, and justice, lest history's shadows reclaim the light.